Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Condo Solutions every Monday morning, 9 to 10 o'clock. We talk about the things that affect you in your homeowners association and in your condo. Some of the things that you may ask about or have questions about, we're here to help you with it. My name is Mark Brechbill. I'm a local CPA and a community association manager, and have been dealing with the condo and HOA area now for some 25 or so years directly. And of course, I've lived in a homeowners association much longer than that. Anyway, we're here to provide some information. We've been doing that for about 16 years, and it's here to help you. So take advantage of it. The number in the studio, 220-9788, 220-WSTU, and that's how you can reach us. All we need you to do is call in with your question. You don't have to give us your association name. In fact, we probably prefer that you don't. Because we don't, it might cause some other individuals who are listening from another association think, oh, that's not my problem. And it may be the exact same problem. It may be very close. For that reason, we also will talk about your individual problem, and hopefully you can stay on, and if you've got a follow-up, but we'll talk about your individual question, and we may also talk a little broader about the question so that we do hit somebody who's similar but not maybe exactly the same. And the other thing that we always kind of give you a little bit of warning on is that we can't give you a legal answer that you can take to court and be 100% sure of. Most of the time, we're going to give you the best answer we can, but we don't have your documents, and so your documents can affect the answer. It can cause the answer to be a little different. And so for that reason, if you need an answer to a question that you're going to court for, or potentially may rely on and have to defend, then in that case you need to maybe give Peter Mullengarden, our attorney here on the show, a call and let him look at your documents and give you a hard and fast answer. But otherwise, Peter will give you the best answer he can here without those documents, and we'll try to answer your question and others' questions. So please take advantage of it. We are here every Monday, so if you've got some friends that might want to listen, or some people that on your board or in your association, you might want to have them tune in on Monday mornings from 9 to 10. And like I said, feel free to call 220-9788, 220-WSTU is the number in the studio. 772, of course, is the area code, and we'll take your call. You write that number down too, because that's a number that's used for a lot of shows here on WSTU. That is the studio line. So if you need to call and get some information in, or get some information, that's the number to call. If you've got traffic information in the morning, you can call in with that too. They'll get that on the air. So that is something that you can use that number for as well. All right. Like I said, we're here to help you. So if we're talking about an issue and it's not necessarily the same issue that you've got, or not even close, feel free to still call. We're going to answer the question of our other listeners if it's from a question, but otherwise we'll get right to your call. So don't be shy about calling in. And if you're calling in and maybe you don't get through the first time, please try again. We'll try to get you in and get you on hold there so you can get on the air. Peter, good morning. Peter, how are you doing this morning?
All right, Mark. Good morning. I'm well. How are you?
Yeah, good. Did you get to watch any football games this weekend?
I watched some. I didn't watch them all.
It's basketball season, right?
No, it's I don't sit and just watch the games like I used to.
Yeah, I know. Well, the thing is, there's only two college teams in the country that consider it to be football season right now. The rest of us are all in basketball season because we don't get to play anymore. But big game tonight, LSU and Clemson. That should be interesting, and we'll see. Kind of gives you an indication to some degree as to how strong the conferences are, which is always kind of nice. Clemson slipped in past Ohio State in the Big Ten, and I think the Big Ten was pretty strong this year. So obviously the Big 12 or whatever that was that Oklahoma plays in is kind of wasted. They ought to just give it up. But anyway, we'll see how strong the SEC is versus the ACC, I guess, tonight. So that should be kind of interesting. And see what's going on. speaking of things going on, life in the condo world and the HOA world, we've got I think Congress's state legislatures in session, aren't they? Did they just get started here, or
They just started up, or they're just starting up.
yeah? So the thing is that while Governor Scott was in office, he was pretty much a no regulation guy, um, and so there wasn't a lot of stuff proposed. If that regulation was restricting activity, if it was loosening up or getting rid of regulation, he was kind of he was pretty much supporting that type of thing. So as a result, in areas that we had hoped to see some legislation that would help clarify some things or make stuff easier, even though it was considered additional regulation, it actually probably would have reduced litigation instead of increasing it. And unfortunately, we didn't see much of that. I'm kind of interested to see if we will see some of that now with Governor DeSantis and what's going to go there. And also, traditionally, um, a lot of legislation or proposed legislation, particularly stuff that was lousy, was coming out of Miami, and 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 that was usually from Rubino's office, and he's out now, I guess, right? So I'm not sure who's going to carry the mantle for Miami-Dade County and some of the stuff that's going on down there. And I've heard a little bit of a word here and there, but I'm not exactly sure who it is. There is somebody who's supposedly focusing on the condo and HOA area down in. I think it's a woman that got elected down in Broward or Miami. So we'll see what happens. See if we get some proposed legislation. It'll be interesting to see where we're going. Um, the other thing that I'm kind of curious about is to see whether I'm interested to see. We got to see some legislation. I wonder if somebody will get it on the table. Maybe we should contact somebody. That'd be a good idea. With this issue with the revenue stuff changing, because like I say, technically it changes all of the regulations that have to do with where revenue is the deciding factor for like audits and reviews and compilations. It's not assessments, it's revenue that determines whether you're subject to an audit or or you have to have an audit or review or compilation. So it'll be interesting to see whether the legislature deals with this, or we'll have to wait all the way till next year, because I don't think the division can handle it even for condos through a rule, because it's in the statute. It's a statutory. It says gap. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. Peter, I'm not sure. So we'll see what's going on. Otherwise,
Well, you get all excited about all that accounting stuff.
well, I'm just excited about the confusion. I don't want, for example, if you have an association that comes to you this year, and they're complaining because you're not having a review done, or whatever, a compilation, and by taking out the reserves and using a different accounting method, which is what I'm worried about, is that it'll be the attorneys making the deciding the accounting regulations based on their particular situation. Depending on if they need the revenue or don't need the revenue, they may or may not take a position on that. And so you got somebody in the community that's complaining and is filing a complaint with the division. Are the attorneys going to then get into the accounting and say, well, technically they're not required to have it because reserves aren't income and we don't have to include it? And I would think you could make that case. And I don't know what the division's going to do, because the statute says revenue and based on US GAAP, based on GAAP. So I'm not sure what they would do at that point. I think you'd win that. I mean, so it's going to leave the division in a situation where, basically they're going to be stuck because they're not accountants. They're not going to be able to even they're not going to determine gap. They're going to turn to the accounting profession. The accounting profession is going to basically say, we don't know. It depends. Depends on which accountant you're talking to. So I'm kind of concerned that there's going to be some issues there. When the first attorney realizes they get their client out of a penalty because they can claim that they didn't have to do it, I think it might come into play. You know what I mean? And see what happens. Or even the fact that you have to waive, you have you have to lower the requirement. You have to waive. So now if you got somebody that has a reserve, has a review, and they were doing a review, but they're supposed to do an audit, those kind of things. I'm also worried about a little bit about the other way around. Let's say somebody does a major project this year. They have in 19, they had a roof replacement, and all of a sudden they did, you know, uh, $200 or $250,000 worth of work or something, or more, and that's going to push them all the way up into an audit where before they didn't maybe have to have one. Um, I'm kind of thinking about those kind of situations too, whether they're going to, they're going to crop up, and now people are going to be claiming they should have had an audit, and they didn't. So I'm just thinking that it's going to cause a lot of confusion at some point. Maybe it won't come out this year. Maybe it'll be next year, but I'm still thinking it's gonna. If the legislature doesn't deal with it, it's gonna be hanging out there. And I don't think the state doesn't believe that they can deal with it. I don't. The division. I don't think they believe they can deal with it without a change in the law. So we'll see what happens. Um, Otherwise, anything else interesting, Peter? I know we're kind of into elections and some of those kind of things. We'll have in the next couple months. We'll have a lot of annual meetings coming up, where you know people will be dealing with all of those. What kind of things at an annual meeting? And let's talk condos versus HOAs first. Do them separately. But at an annual meeting, what kind of things do you look to advise your clients that they need to, that they should look at doing or putting on their agenda for their annual meetings? Is there anything in particular?
Well, for condominiums, I mean, the obvious is your your election is required to be held in conjunction with your annual meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So for many associations, I would probably say the vast majority, the election oftentimes is like the only true business that is handled at the meeting. However, for many associations, it's the only membership meeting they do in the year,
Right.
and the rest are just board meetings. So to the extent that there are votes that you want to be taken of the membership, that's the time to do it. Whether that's an amendment or an alteration, material alteration. If you're also an association that on an annual basis votes to waive or reduce reserves, then that's obviously a membership vote. For those associations that hold their annual meetings after the commencement of their fiscal year, I'd recommend they do those votes at a special members meeting before. Otherwise, it kind of gunks up the works, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
when they're getting ready, to send out what their assessments are, and some of them just anticipate, I guess, that they're going to waive, right?
Right. Yeah.
So they send out their assessment notices in anticipation, but the owners really haven't voted yet. And as far as from with respect to their annual financial report, that vote, if they're voting to reduce, go from an audit to a review, or an audit to a compilation, or a review to a compilation, or something like that, that's supposed to be done before the end of the fiscal year for which they're doing the report. So again, that's something they should not try to do retroactively, because the statute it doesn't permit that, although I know some do. So for the annual meetings, obviously first and foremost is the election. But again, since most associations don't have too many membership meetings, try to do as much business that you need the membership to address as possible.
Well, and that is one of the things that that we look at when we look at those annual meetings is the is the election of the board and getting the board settled in and having the the first board meeting so that they can elect officers. That's always a key issue. So getting the board put together and getting the officers elected, that's always a significant thing that comes into play. But but I know that that is something that we have to we have to look at the annual meeting. The the Go ahead and if you called, go ahead and call back. If we just had a call coming through but it got dropped, so go ahead and call back and we'll get you on. Sorry about that. So the annual meeting. The other thing is that we do have to put on and provide an agenda for that. So that is always going to be an issue as well. So make sure that you do that, and that you notice you've got the proper notices, and get those notices out. And then the other thing that we need to to look at is there's any, like Peter said, any of the waiving of or reduction of assessments, waiving of audits, that type. You can't waive them completely, but reductions in the required reporting for financial statements. And then the last and then there's always a few other things that we should look at. So but let's we got a call. Brenda, go ahead.
Hi, this is Brenda.
Yeah, go ahead.
Could you talk about annual meetings and quorums and things? If our association board people, like if we have no more than the people that are already on there, what do you call that? Like no more uncontested election thing. Do we still have a meeting, and how do we determine that there's a quorum and stuff like that?
Peter, you want to
homeowner association or a condominium association?
A condo.
Okay. You're talking about the annual meeting, the membership meeting? Okay. Well, if you're having an election, so let's assume for the sake of argument you have more people running than you have seats to fill. Okay, so you're having a contested election. For quorum purposes, this is a good question because the law does address this. For quorum purposes in a condominium association for an election, it's 20% of the eligible voters or the eligible voting interests casting a ballot or a vote in the election. So even though your documents may require a majority of the owners to be represented for quorum, typically for the purposes of an election, it's just 20% of those voting. 20% of the electorate voting. So it's a pretty low quorum requirement. In the case where you have the same or fewer number of candidates than vacancies to be filled, then there is no election. And those candidates who submitted their names are automatically on the board. If nobody submits, then arguably those in office roll over and continue in office. But for any other business, as we were just discussing, for any other business at that meeting, whether it's voting on the waiver of reserves or voting on an amendment, or voting on the reduction of the financial reporting requirement, then you need the quorum that your bylaws require for a membership meeting. Now, typically that's a majority. It's not always a majority. You have to look at the bylaws to see what do they require for a quorum. So in essence, if you're going to be doing any other business, you need the quorum that your bylaws require For the election purposes, as I mentioned, it's only 20% of the eligible voting interest voting. If there's no election, obviously, then you don't need a quorum for election because there is no election.
Peter, let me ask you this along the same lines of Brenda's question here. So let's say that, so for purposes of establishing a quorum for voting, it's 20%, right? So 20%
For election.
For election. Now, that's 20% of those people, 20% of those people eligible to vote, right? That's the thing, right? So that can be by proxy basically, or by mail-in vote.
Well, there's no proxies, no, so don't say that. There's
Okay.
no proxies allowed.
It's a mail-in. It's a mail-in vote. Okay.
No,
So
it's a mail-in or a hand delivery.
Right.
It's those ballots you've received. So let's say you have 100 units, and let's say it's one vote per unit, just to make it simple. Let's say everyone's eligible to vote because you don't have any suspensions or anything like that. So then you need 20 ballots cast, 20%, in order to have a valid election. Very rarely do you see an election in a condo not occur because of a quorum problem.
Right.
Because it's such a low percentage.
Now, let me ask you this. Does that, just out of curiosity, is that in that 20%, does it include everybody who cast a ballot, or everybody who cast a valid ballot? So let's say somebody votes for 2 and was supposed to vote for 1, or was voted for the incorrect number, or maybe it wasn't signed correctly, or whatever.
Good question. I would probably say it's even the invalid ones would count toward the quorum.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting question. I would probably say at least they're there for quorum purposes, even though their ballot might not have counted.
And
I'm not sure I would count one that. It's a good question. I'm not sure I would count one that wasn't signed at all because you don't even know who that's from.
Yeah.
So I probably would not count those that were just not even signed because those ballots really were never cast.
Yeah. So if they cast an incorrect one but signed,
I guess thinking it through, I guess probably it would be 20% casting a valid ballot. I guess.
Okay.
I haven't seen any case on that point.
Yeah.
So if we
go ahead,
have
Brenda.
the people that are on the board now are willing to serve again, we don't have an election, but do we still have a meeting?
If there's
nothing else to do.
If there's nothing else to do, then the meeting is somewhat superfluous. Okay, I don't know whether they also send out proxies in order to get a quorum purpose. In order to get just a quorum. But generally speaking, if there's no other business being conducted, technically there is no official annual meeting because you don't have a quorum. Now, what many associations do is, for their annual meeting, they'll mail out. Well, in your case, no, because there wasn't an election. But they would mail out the second notice of the annual meeting along with a proxy, a general proxy, just for quorum purposes. If there is no quorum, there is no official meeting. Some associations simply then just have an informal, informational meeting where the owners who do show up, the board might give a report, about the treasurer might give what's the state of the finances and things like that. But there would not be an official meeting because there's no quorum.
Yeah. I wouldn't. If it was me, I would still, like Peter said, I'd still try to send out something so that we could get a quorum for an annual meeting, only because, presumably if you had a meeting the previous year, you got to ratify minutes or something like that. There are some housekeeping tools that really should get done once a year. If there's any issues with reserves, you can only really deal with those at an annual meeting, things like that. So, it's one of those kind of things where it really is good. I know, for example, we always encourage at the annual meeting that there be a resolution that is a tax resolution, and it's not used most of the time, but it has to be
the rollover.
Yeah.
The surplus.
Yeah. Because if they don't if they don't provide, if the members don't provide for that, it's not valid. The IRS says it's a member vote that's required for that resolution. So if that's the case and it turns out that we have to use it, we can't because the members didn't ratify it. And didn't vote for it. And it's not a case that they can go back next year and ratify it. They have to, technically they have to approve it before we make the election, before we file the tax return. So there are a lot of those kind of things that it's just nice if you can clean those up and have them in the minutes so that you've got a record of them if you ever need them. But I know there's a lot of associations that have never had officers. Have never had directors that were needed to be voted on. They all, they have the same group of people, or they have only the same number of people that want to run and so they never, they end up not having a quorum and don't have an annual meeting, So I think, like Peter said, if you can use a general proxy or something for that purpose, just to establish quorum, it's usually a good idea if you can do that. Just to have the meeting.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So appreciate it.
Brenda.
Thanks, Brenda. Appreciate the call. And so, yeah, it's it's interesting too that we didn't talk. We talked condo. We didn't talk HOA, but one of the things that gets to be an issue is that and why we probably will continue to have a problem is in the HOA world, we got these statutory and non-statutory reserves. And so you get into this issue as to whether or not members need to approve a change. And now that we got pooled reserves, you get into this whole issue of being able to take the straight line reserves and push them into the pool and all of that kind of thing. So, I think it's a good idea to try to have an annual meeting. Like you said, even if you have an informational meeting, but it's good to be able to have something that you can vote and or have ratify transactions that have occurred. At most annual meetings of corporate entities, one of the things that they do is ratify the actions of the previous board. Sometimes it's informal, but a lot of times when we do written consents, for example, of people, one of the reasons we do them is to ratify transactions or ratify the decisions so that if there is anything that happens, the board is protected. The members had ratified that. So, there's things like that. That doesn't come up. I'm surprised that doesn't come up more, Peter, in HOAs and condos, that there's not resolutions for that purpose.
You see them. You don't see them all the time, but you do see on the agendas sometimes the ratification of prior acts in some broad, manner.
Yeah. I think 617 probably gives you some protections that make it not quite as necessary for the members to ratify something like that, or even the board to ratify it. A lot of times the boards will ratify the actions of the officers, but so maybe it's 617 makes a difference there, I guess. But I was always kind of surprised because, corporate world, we usually, on a monthly basis or an annual basis, you're ratifying those actions. You're providing some sort of ratification. So.
Well, no, these are corporations, and again, you do see it. You don't see it as frequently, but you do see, the board or the membership, ratifying prior acts.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the one thing that it just, since we were just talking about condominiums, and I know we said this before, but it is, I guess, good to repeat since we just talked about condos. For homeowner associations, it's completely different with respect to their annual meeting and the quorum. Because for homeowner associations, you have to follow your bylaws for your election procedure.
Mm-hmm.
So in a condominium, where it's by statute, and the statute says that for election purposes, the quorum is 20% of basically the electorate voting. In an HOA, it's usually not that way unless your bylaws have a specific provision. So in HOAs, follow your bylaws, and if your bylaws require a quorum, for any membership vote, that would include elections. So that means you would have to have a quorum. So in a quorum in an HOA is 30% of the owners represented in person or by proxy, or 30% of the the voting interest represented by person or by proxy, unless the bylaws have a lower number. So, long story short, what I said about condominium associations does not translate to an HOA unless the bylaws and the HOA track the condo type procedure.
Yeah. And so
I just want to throw that.
And so we clarify because this comes up from time to time. It's if your bylaws are basically less restrictive, right? So if you have a the state statute is 30%. If you have a 20%, then
that would control.
You could use yours, but if you had a 40%, you'd use the statute still, right?
You'd follow the statute.
Yeah. So, which confuses people. It's funny. I forget what issue it was, but a few years back, about 5 years.
That's what everyone had kind of agreed to by consensus. Who knows if some appellate court will ever rule on that? I'm not aware they have.
Yeah. It's funny because there was an issue a number of years back, and I think it had to do with something of members ratifying, members taking a vote, and I think it might have had to do with reducing or removing the requirement of an audit, audit or compilation review, and and the state was taking the position because the state law is is basically the 120 days, 90 plus whatever it is, but 120 days in effect is what it happens, and they took the position which I would have thought that the 30, that if you had something in your documents that's 60 days or 90 days, that is more restrictive and doesn't apply. That
does not apply.
Does not apply. And that it would be then it would fall back to statute. But if you had something that said it was 6 months, then the statute would apply. So it was kind of weird. I was kind of surprised at that. I think so were a lot of guys, a lot of people that were at that meeting. But and I don't remember specifically now, but I think that's what it was. I think the question I had was relative to, waiving.
Normally the more restrictive applies,
right? And
okay. But like I said, the statute again specifically says 30% unless lower number. So
yeah. So
we've all kind of gone with that.
And I think that's what I've always heard is what you're saying. But anyway, I will say that, it is this area of, your requirements applying, in your documents applying is a big deal in the HOA world, because many of those documents are written and were written to provide a great deal of flexibility and a great deal of control, whether it was originally for the developer and it hasn't been changed, or whether it was for the board and, an attorney came in and wrote provisions, or modified documents initially, so that the board would have, an easier time of managing the association. And I don't disagree with that. I'm not saying that that's a problem, but, a lot of people don't realize that over a period of time, the attorneys and others have, their goal is to help the board manage the association as effectively and efficiently as possible. They're looking out for the members, but they're also trying to structure the organization so that, the board can easily get things done. That's why a lot of attorneys had addressed the quorum issue before the statute, because in the HOA world, it was always hard to get a quorum. And so many attorneys had addressed that long before the legislature did. It's the same thing with a lot of the stuff that goes on with associations in terms of approvals and things like that. Some of that is less restrictive, even elections. because you've got more latitude on the HOA side. Elections were sometimes different. They may how you even address candidates may be different. Based on the bylaws. That's a different situation. I've got an association that uses a nominating committee, and the nominating committee puts up the directors, and then there's a provision if people you know don't if aren't there's a people for people who aren't put up by the nominating committee to have their name put on the ballot. But in general, their bylaws require that there be a nominating committee and that everybody apply to the nominating committee, and the nominating committee propose the slate. So there's a lot of different things like that can happen in the HOA world because it's not the same as it's not the procedure's not the
Right.
same.
You have to have nominations from the floor.
Right.
In an HOA, unless your bylaws have a pre-nomination process.
Right. Mm-hmm.
By which everyone has the opportunity to nominate themselves. Again, in your bylaws. Otherwise, you have nominations from the floor. As we all know, in condominiums, there are no nominations from the floor.
Right.
So, yeah, there's key distinctions.
And
in the election process.
And like I say, over a period of time, the attorneys had made modifications to that or have done things, to either, to make it easier. I will tell you this. I have, I like the idea of the nominating committees and things like that. I understand that strengthens the people that are in power to some degree, but I mean, and there's always a provision around that, but I always kind of my big concern with condos and HOAs is that you've got volunteers, people who step forward to volunteer, and then an issue comes up, and the next thing there's a big argument, and now all of a sudden this person they get themselves into a position where they're almost embarrassed to be seen in public at their own association, rightly or wrongly. I mean, I've talked about the situations where the power gets vested in the president and nobody else, and the president's been in office for 15 years, and like I said, my experience has been that most times those presidents are really trying to do good things. And they think that, look, I can just get it done easier if I don't have to deal with all these other people. And nobody else wants to do it, so I'm not going to go out and look for them. And, and like I said, that usually ends up in a problem, even though the intent was good. Usually when there's only one person, it opens it up to criticism. And it's the same thing with, we have groups, nonprofit organizations and others, that if you had to run on a contested election, I'm in a group, Martin County Business Exchange, and I always hate it when we have more people running than positions, because that means there has to be election, and this is a networking friendship organization, and now all of a sudden you got to say which guy's my better friend, and that doesn't work good. You don't like to make those kind of choices. And because you like all the guys, it's all the people. So anyway, it's kind of a funny thing. And the same thing in the HOA world. I hate for these contested elections, because if somebody doesn't get voted in, it always is, are they going to run again? Maybe they were doing it because they had some good ideas and they thought they wanted help, and then they don't get elected. So they say, well, I'm not a politician. I don't need to do this. And so they never run again, and those good ideas never come forward, just because they didn't get elected. And most HOAs, and most HOAs I know of, they would gladly accept people. They usually are looking for people to serve on the board. If you serve on the board, you're automatically elected. But I hate the contested ones, because it does put the people in a tough position. And then now you got to go out and rally around the troops and do you go door to door and knock on your neighbors' doors to request that they vote? Campaign. Yeah. It's a little easier in a condo association that's a building where it's all a high rise, and you can, everybody's all in the same location. You see each other in the lobby or something, but in an HOA, you got to go around the neighborhood, and put up signs or whatever. So it's always kind of interesting. Don't put in speed bumps. All right. 220-9788, 220-WSTU is the number in the studio. Brenda, we appreciate that call. Thank you very much. Anybody else, feel free. That's the process. Just like she went through, you just call in, give us your name. Don't have to give us your association name, and just tell us what your issue is, and we'll be happy to address it. And we always appreciate it when people do. I was going to ask you something, Peter, about associations, but about the HOAs, but I can't remember now what the question was I had on that. But
well, you can call in when you remember.
Yeah, I will. Let's try. It could be probably this afternoon sometime. I'll probably remember what the heck it was I was talking about. But I know one of the things that we were looking at with I know what I was going to ask you about. HOAs, and I guess condos too, but this is more of an HOA issue. Who has the deciding factor in terms of what activities can be run or held or handled out of your home in an HOA? Is it the association? Is it the city, or is it the county? Who basically determines whether you can? Let's say, for example, I'm running a commercial business, and I'm running a commercial business out of my home in my homeowners association. Now I know, the county has ordinances that prohibit you from running a commercial enterprise in an area that's not zoned for commercial. So I would definitely, so I'd be in violation of the county code. But I know, and most associations have provisions against that as well. Some may not be as restrictive as the county code, actually, but they would have restrictions. So let's say I got an HOA and I've got a restriction in my HOA that I can't park a a company truck in my driveway, but then I also have, but I'm not running my commercial business out of there. I'm bringing home my company truck. And then let's take a second scenario where I'm bringing home my company truck and maybe two other company trucks, and and that's my main office of my business, and I'm running my business out of there. Who would govern in that? Or who would take the first action? Is that an HOA action, or do you go directly to the county and file a lawsuit, or file a complaint, or how do you handle something like that?
Well, it would be both.
Okay.
In terms of, you do have the county and the city. If you're in a city municipality, they have their own ordinances and zoning provisions. And they're enforceable, and the city and the county, they enforce their stuff, independently of the association. The association then has its own private covenants, which can be more restrictive than the city and the county. And there's no real hard, fast rule of who enforces first. Sometimes what I'll tell an association is, if what the owner is doing, like with some kind of commercial enterprise or something, try to get the county or the city involved, so then they can carry the ball without you guys having to, spend your money.
Right.
Now, oftentimes the city and the county are slower. Okay. They're not moving as fast. And then, they do their own thing, but, they're both separate tracks, and they can both be carried on independently of each other. If the city or the county may not, think it rises to the level of a violation or something, it's still a violation of the association documents, because it violates their truck restriction or their vehicle restriction or signage restriction or whatever. So you enforce your own.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
there's,
The question, then the other question, I guess, is that in terms of teeth, who can do what? Now, the county or the municipality, they can remove that business's license, right? I mean, they can say you're not operating your business in an area that's allowed. We're revoking your business license because it's not a legitimate business location.
well, assuming that they're even issuing a license. I mean, it depends again
Yeah,
what,
I guess.
what they're doing. But generally, the city, what the city does is, they have, they'll have a hearing, they'll have a code enforcement, they can fine, and then they can put a lien for fines.
Yeah, and that's what I was getting at. So they can do that, but what about the HOA? The HOA
The
can
HOA
fine.
generally, obviously, we all know what the HOA's enforcement, remedies are. They run anywhere from fines, suspensions, to their own lawsuits, seeking typically injunctive relief,
Mhm.
where you're suing to enjoin, in other words, stop the activity. Now with an HOA, we'll just use that as an example. First you have to go through what's known as pre-suit mediation, where you have to send out a specific type of letter listing at least 5 mediators. The owner has to choose one of those and respond. You have a mediation. If it resolves at mediation, there's a mediation agreement that's enforceable in court. If it doesn't resolve at mediation, if you reach an impasse, then the association can file suit in circuit court, seeking typically injunctive relief, again, to enjoin the activity, or to enjoin whatever that activity may be, whether it's parking a truck, running the commercial business, the commercial signage, or any signage, whatever it may be. So, whereas, again, the city or the county, they have, their own notice and hearing and
now if the
their
HOA
process.
if the HOA fines, let's say the HOA levies a fine, and it's probably a fine per day, right? So they levy a fine. Can they foreclose on that fine? They can't, can they? I mean,
Depends on their documents. Yes, an HOA, a condo has no lien for a fine by law,
right.
under Chapter 718. Under Chapter 720, an association can lien for a fine, but they can't lien for a fine of less than $1,000. So, and also in the HOA, you can only fine for $100 per violation, cap of $1,000, but your documents can allow you to have a higher number. In a condo, you can't. You're just capped. The HOA documents can allow you to have a higher than the $100 per violation or $1,000 in the aggregate. In my opinion, although even though the HOA statute says you can lien for a fine of $1,000 or more, in my opinion, your documents still have to authorize liening for the fine.
Okay.
It just doesn't come out of thin air.
Okay.
So, in my opinion, you need the combination of the statute plus your documents authorizing liening for the fine.
So you'd get up to the 10, and there'd be 1,000, and then if your documents have authorization for that, you could then lien for that $1,000.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, that's good information. Good things for people to know. Anyway, like I say, appreciate the question this morning, and we also encourage you to tell your friends about it. We're here every Monday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock, and we'll be here to answer your questions. That's why we're here. So make use of us. We appreciate your calls. We appreciate your consideration. We always like to address the issues that are important to you. And that's what we're about right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We are Martin County's very, 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 very old station.